Eskinder Nega, Amhara Fano National Movement, and the coalition no one is allowed to question. Political movements disclose their character long before they acquire state power. They do so in the way their leaders handle disagreement, in the distance between the principles they proclaim and the conduct they tolerate, and above all in how they treat people who ask questions they would rather leave unanswered. A movement may speak endlessly of freedom while nurturing the instincts of a dictatorship. It may condemn government censorship while issuing its own warnings against public speech. It may promise a future governed by law while allowing personal authority, armed power, and regional loyalty to determine who may speak and who must submit. The controversy surrounding Eskinder Nega's Deutsche Welle Amharic interview has brought these tendencies within the Amhara Fano National Movement into public view. The disagreement concerns a coalition negotiated between Fano leaders and several armed organizations, including the Tigray People's Liberation Front. According to Zemeni Kassi, discussions with at least 7 groups continued for 7 or 8 months and produced an agreement. He presented the arrangement as a decisive development in the campaign to remove Abiy Ahmed, even though the Amhara public was given almost no information about its political terms. The participating organizations were not fully identified, the agreement was not published, the negotiating mandate was never explained, and no account was offered of how Fano's different military formations and ordinary members had been consulted. Questions involving Welkate, Raya, ethnic federalism, accountability for the genocide and atrocities committed against Amharas, and the distribution of power after Abiy were buried beneath the convenient language of strategy. The manner in which the coalition was announced deepened these concerns. Zemeni chose to disclose this consequential arrangement through Le Temps, a Swiss newspaper, rather than appear before Ethiopian media and submit himself to sustained questioning in a language and forum readily accessible to the people whose future he was negotiating. Ethiopian media later covered his announcement, and the public discussed it, though the story never acquired the breadth or intensity that followed Eskinder's appearance on Deutsche Welle. Zemeni announced an alliance intended to reorganize Ethiopia's armed opposition, yet Eskinder's objections became the larger political event, because they addressed the questions left hanging over that announcement. Eskinder said the coalition had been formed without the knowledge and consent of ordinary members of the movement. He questioned the legitimacy of reaching such an agreement without a wider mandate, and rejected cooperation with political forces that had helped create the conditions under which Amharas now find themselves. He also described repeated attempts on his life by government forces and armed actors, whose names he declined to disclose. Each claim required a serious organizational response. The leadership could have produced a record identifying the participants, the approving commands, and the procedures followed. Zemeni could also have appeared before Ethiopian media and defended the agreement in detail, allowing the public to judge whether Eskinder's objections had merit. The Amhara Fano National Movement instead released a formal statement directed at Eskinder. Its language treated his public expression as an organizational offense and warned of measures if he continued speaking in the same manner. The document devoted its energy to controlling Eskinder's conduct, while leaving the substance of his criticism unaddressed. It offered no explanation of the coalition's terms, the authority behind the negotiations, or the degree of consent among the organization's membership. A matter involving the future of the Amhara struggle was reduced to a question of whether one member had permission to discuss it publicly. That response provides an early view of Zemeni's conception of power. He presents himself as the chairman of a national movement, and potentially as a future leader, in a post-Abiy political order. Leadership at that level requires the ability to answer criticism, defend decisions before the public, restrain personal hostility, and understand that political legitimacy cannot be enforced through military power. Zemeni has demonstrated little of that capacity here. He announced the coalition abroad, avoided a rigorous examination by Ethiopian media, and allowed an official organizational statement to assume the tone of a warning. The message is clear. Decisions made at the top are to be accepted, while those who challenge them publicly may face consequences. That message has disturbing implications for any future in which Zemin exercises broader political authority. Armed movements frequently justify secrecy and rigid command structures through the pressures of war. Yet the habits formed during rebellion rarely disappear after victory. A commander who regards criticism as insubordination during the struggle is unlikely to become a constitutional democrat after entering a palace. The instinct to use organizational machinery against a dissenter can later be carried into ministries, courts, and security institutions. Ethiopia's history is filled with liberation movements that promised emancipation, seized power, and reproduced the coercion they had once condemned. Their prisons received new inmates, their propaganda acquired new slogans, and their leaders explained each act of repression as necessary for unity. Zemini's own rhetoric gives further reason for concern. He has spoken of burning alive people who opposed him. Such words cannot be dismissed as rough battlefield speech when they come from a man seeking recognition as the head of a national political movement. A leader who boasts about inflicting a medieval form of death on opponents is advertising a political temperament governed by vengeance and terror. His response to Eskinder's interview belongs within that same pattern of authority, where disagreement is experienced as defiance and defiance invites punishment. This is the disposition of a warlord shaped by Stone Age ideas of power, where possession of weapons is mistaken for possession of wisdom, and fear is treated as proof of respect. A man may organize fighters, survive in the countryside, and command loyalty within his home territory, while remaining wholly unprepared to govern a plural society. Statecraft requires patience, intellectual discipline, moral restraint, and a willingness to explain decisions to those who will live under them. Zemini's handling of one dissenting interview has displayed grievance, insecurity, and an appetite for tyranny. None of these qualities qualifies him to determine the future of the Amhara people or Ethiopia. The wider campaign against Eskinder has adopted the same political temperament. Social media personalities, commentators, and self-appointed intellectuals rush to insult him, call him a failed politician, demand action from the organization, and in some cases use language encouraging his death. They concentrated on Eskinder's character while avoiding his objections to the coalition. Their attacks served a disciplinary purpose by making the personal cost of questioning the agreement so severe that other members would learn to remain silent. The accusation that he is a failed politician was central to this effort, despite being among the weakest claims his opponents could have chosen. Political success in Ethiopia has rarely been determined through free institutions. It has been measured through control of the army, prisons, bureaucracy, and machinery of fear. By that standard, Mengistu Haile Mariam, Meles Zenawi, and Abiy Ahmed become the country's exemplary political successes, while those they imprisoned, killed, or drove into exile become failures. Such a definition belongs naturally to people who worship power and mistake survival at the top for statesmanship. It also explains why they can see authority in Zemini's organizational title, while refusing to recognize the political influence Eskinder accumulated over decades of sacrifice. Eskinder's public life has passed through journalism, peaceful opposition, repeated imprisonment, and eventually armed resistance. He continued confronting authoritarian governments when the cost was high and personal. His decisions remain open to criticism, as the decisions of every political leader should be. But his endurance cannot honestly be dismissed by commentators whose political courage has seldom extended beyond a studio or social media page. Their insult becomes especially pointless when the man they describe as irrelevant speaks for a few minutes and commands greater public attention than the chairman announcing a major military coalition. The attention surrounding Eskinder's interview reflects an authority that does not depend on his current position within the Amhara Fano National Movement. His name was established through prisons and confrontations that preceded the rise of the present commanders. He may describe himself as an ordinary member, yet the public does not experience him as ordinary. People recognize an independent political history behind his words, giving him a credibility that cannot be transferred to Zemini through an organizational decree. This independence has long made Eskinder a problem for political circles seeking to control Fano through regional networks and personal loyalties. For years, those circles accused Eskinder of being excessively Ethiopianist. His commitment to Ethiopia was used to question whether he could represent Amhara interests, and he was portrayed as a man trapped in an old national vision while his people faced organized persecution. The accusation helped isolate him and created political space for provincial actors who wanted to dominate the Amhara struggle. Those same people now celebrate a coalition of ethnically organized forces from Tigray, Oromia, Somali, Gumuz, and other communities. Zemeni speaks about the freedom and equality of Ethiopia's nations and nationalities, and about constructing a shared country after Abiy, using language remarkably similar to the ideas once invoked to disqualify Eskinder. Their principles shift according to the faction that benefits from them. Ethiopianism became a political crime when it gave Eskinder national stature, while multinational cooperation became strategic when Zemeni needed a justification for his coalition. The contradiction runs deeper than simple hypocrisy, because it shows that their original objection concerned control. Eskinder's vision placed him beyond the ownership of any provincial faction. Zemeni's coalition leaves those factions in command of their territories, armies, and political machinery, while allowing them to present their arrangement as a national project. This struggle for control also explains why the campaign against Eskinder has become so reckless. He is one of the most internationally recognizable figures associated with Fano. If he were harmed after weeks of public vilification, the consequences would extend far beyond internal factional politics. The government would exploit the event to portray Fano as a movement that murders its own leaders. International media would focus on warlordism, fragmentation, and political assassination. Abiy Ahmed would use the incident to strengthen his demand that Fano be treated as a terrorist organization and seek further diplomatic, financial, and military support. Those calling for Eskinder's death are gambling with the fate of the entire struggle while pretending to defend it. Their behavior also serves TPLF's political interests by weakening resistance to an alliance that has never been adequately explained. A durable arrangement with TPLF-linked forces requires the Amhara public to lower its guard and accept assurances in place of enforceable terms. The people most useful to that project are those willing to attack anyone who raises the history of TPLF rule, the annexation of Amhara territories, the genocide and destruction inflicted on Amharas by TPLF, OLF and other forces, and the incompatible political objectives that continue beneath the language of cooperation. Smearing Eskinder clears political space for the coalition, while sparing its architects from defending what they negotiated. The backlash cannot erase the fact that Eskinder's objections are shared by millions of Amharas. His concerns belong to people who have buried their families, lost their lands, and watched successive governments negotiate over their future without their consent. Zemeni therefore has an obligation to explain the political safeguards he obtained, the concessions he made, and the authority under which he acted. He must answer why a matter of such national importance was explained to a Swiss newspaper rather than an Amhara Ethiopian media. He must explain why Eskinder's objections produced an organizational warning instead of a public answer. And he must account for the violent rhetoric that raises serious questions about his fitness to lead. Those questions remain untouched by every insult directed at Eskinder. Calling him a failed politician does not publish the agreement. Calling him an Ethiopianist does not identify who authorized the negotiations. Calling him a divider does not reconcile the conflicting territorial and political objectives of the coalition's members. Describing him as an ordinary member does not make Zemeni's warning compatible with the freedom he claims to be fighting for. The more his opponents concentrate on labels, the more obvious their inability to defend the agreement becomes. Their anger toward Eskinder grows from the powerlessness they experience in his presence. They control the organizational stamp, the command structure, and the official statements, while he continues to command public attention without their permission. Their attempt to answer his questions with intimidation has given those questions a larger audience. In trying to establish Zemeni as the uncontested voice of Fano, they have allowed an ordinary member to place the chairman himself on trial before the public. That trial now concerns far more than the coalition. It concerns the political character of the man and organization that negotiated it, and the kind of authority the organization and the chairman intends to exercise. What did Zemeni agree to? Who authorized him? And what kind of future leader threatens a member for telling the public that it was never consulted? Until he and the organization he leads faces those questions directly, every warning issued against Eskinder will stand as an admission that the chairman possesses coercive power, but lacks the political authority to defend how he has used it.